Start.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa usallam ala Sayyid al-Awwaleen wal Akhirin. Nabiyyina Muhammadan wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be constantly showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, the master of the first and the last, and on his family, his companions, and all those who call to his way and establish his sunnah to the day of judgment. As to what follows, my beloved brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, Allah has blessed us again with the opportunity to reflect upon the final countdown. What would be happening in this universe, on the earth, in this world, as we go toward the major change of the day of resurrection. And this is a day, this is an event that has been predicted by all of the prophets, and even people who are not focusing on religion recognize that we are at the cusp or at the border of an apocalypse. And every day that goes by, every week that goes by, we realize that nuclear war is imminent. And there are certain aspects of the signs, certain things that the Prophet ﷺ had predicted that would come, that are actually more apparent today than they were in previous times. And so we need to understand the whole issue of the signs, the different levels of the signs, the different relationships that people have with the signs. Because this is a science, and it's extremely important for Muslims to know this today, and it is a subject that has not been given its proper weight. In other religious communities, much of their focus, much of their sermons amongst the Christians, the Jews, other religions, is concerning the events of the world and where we stand in relationship with the creator of the heavens and the earth. And so in that light, we want to look at the signs. And we recognized that the Prophet ﷺ had informed us that among the trials and tribulations will be three. And these three will almost destroy everything. And among them will be some that are like summer breezes. Some of them will be minor, and some of them will be major. It's the technology. And so it is important that we recognize the fact that the test, and the word fitan that we see in this hadith, the plural, which is the plural of fitna, is a trial, it's a tribulation, it's a test, it's a gray area. And it's interesting because even recently, somebody was speaking about, they had seen within the signs of the last days about the Great War, the Malhama al-Kubra that would come. And in this Great War, out of every 100 people, 99 would die. So this is coming in a tradition. And so that needs to be understood, and we need to be able to ease into this understanding. Because really, if you think about conventional warfare, and 99 people out of 100 dying in a war, that really, for us, that's nuclear war. Because the level of destruction that nuclear weapons have reached really is such where human life doesn't make sense, or human life is worthless. And so, getting back to our science now, the concept of the minor and the major signs. And so these signs are called Asharat as-Sa'a, Ayat as-Sa'a, Alamat as-Sa'a, and there are minor signs. There are those that are fulfilled and gone. They're finished. And then there are those that happened and they still repeat themselves. And then there are those that have not yet happened in this world. And so this is the way that many of the ulama will break the signs down into different sections. And of course, along with the minor signs, there are major signs. And so when we look at the signs that have happened, the first that is listed based upon the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ is his coming. It is the sending, the bi'thah of the last messenger, alayhi salatu wasalam. And his coming and his death is actually one of the signs of the day of resurrection. Because we have understood that over 124,000 prophets and messengers have come, every nation, every tribe. There have been ulul azm min al-rusul. There have been the great, powerful, resolute prophets that have come, Nuh alayhi salam, Ibrahim, Musa, Isa, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there have been prophets who have been sent to China, prophets to India, prophets to Europe, prophets to Africa, to the Americas. Every part of the world at one point in time received a messenger, but the final prophet, the seal, the khatam, that is the role of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because not only is it he as an individual, but it is the seal of the communication of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for humanity. And in this final seal came the Quran. And so that final testament, that final communication, when the messenger leaves, that means that the communication, the direct communication, is over. Now it is possible to have what is called karama, and that is a minor miracle, things that happen, there are miracles, but it is not what is called mu'jiza. And the mu'jiza are the miracles that come to the messengers. And so the death of the Prophet ﷺ was a momentous occasion. And for those who understood their relationship with the Creator, it was a key sign that we are now close to the day of resurrection. But of course, time is relative, because he has passed away over 1,400 years ago. And that might seem like a lot of time, but if you look at human beings living on this earth for maybe 100,000 years or so, this is really, a short period of time. The second of the signs that have already happened, and this is called the splitting of the moon, inshiqaq al-qamar. And we find this in the Quran itself. There is Surah Al-Qamar, which is the 54th chapter of the Quran, and that is telling us, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, اقتربت الساعة وانشق القمر وإن يروا آية يعرضوا ويقولوا سحر مستمر. Allah told us the hour has drawn near and the moon has split. So it broke into halves or pieces. Then the verse says, and if they see a sign, meaning the mushrikeen, they turn away and they say this is continuous magic. It is magic that continues to go on. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh reported that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that he was with the Messenger of Allah. And it was a time when the mushrikeen were asking for a sign. They were asking for something. And the Prophet ﷺ then pointed, toward the moon and said, look at this sign, and the moon actually split. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, bear witness to this. And this is multiple hadith. In some of the hadith, it was reported by the companions, they said they were in Mina. Okay, this is like outside of Mecca when it happened. Another one was saying that part of it was on one side of the sky, another part was on the other side. But it is a standing miracle which is accepted by the scholars without doubt that this moon actually split during this time, the time of the last prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And of course, in the scientific world, there's a lot of controversy. There's actually been a time in the 12th century when in northern countries, in the British Isles, that they actually claimed that they saw the moon, break. There's been a lot of discussions on this. There are pictures of the moon, and you could actually see, markings in the moon. And there's a lot of controversy about this. But we consider this to be mu'jiza. So this is a miracle. And mu'jiza means something that people cannot actually do, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it happen. And in the same way that Allah created Adam, alayhi salam, in the same way the creations that we see over and over again, the moon is a material thing, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has power over all things. And so for it to happen, for the believer, it is definitely possible, because we actually believe, according to what the Quran has shown us, that eventually the earth is going to be flattened out and the sun will come close, that the universe as we know it will be going through major changes. And so the splitting of the moon, this miracle is a sign which has happened. And scholars do not expect this particular sign to be happening again. It is over. The third of the signs, and there are a few of them, but these are the clearest of the signs, and that is a great fire that happened in Hijaz. And it's interesting to read the historical reports. And I want to quote from some of the historical reports so you can actually see how the scholars dealt with this. And this happened in the year 654 after the Hijrah. And what is important about this year, if you change it into the Gregorian calendar, then you will see it's approximately 1256 AD. 1256. And this is really an apocalyptic time, because it was in 1258 that the Mongols sacked Baghdad, in 1258. So this happened in 1256. So this was a time of tremendous change, where people did not understand what was going on in the world. And one of the great scholars and historians, Ibn Kathir, he wrote about this event, and he's one of the most authentic of the historians. And he said, in this year appeared the fire from the land of Hijaz, which illuminated necks of camels in Busra, as was spoken in the hadith. Because now, if you look to the right of the screen, you'll see that there's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, the hour will not come until fire comes out of the land of Hijaz, which will illuminate the necks of the camels in Busra. Okay, so this is how it goes. This is straightforward. That a fire will come, the Hijaz meaning the area of Mecca and Medina, that strip on the western side of Arabia, and a fire would come out of there. And Busra is up in the area of Syria. So therefore a fire is going to come out of that area that's going to literally illuminate the necks of camels in Busra. And this is found in Bukhari and Muslim. And so Ibn Kathir then said, the leading scholar, Al-Hafiz Shihab ad-Din Abu Shama al-Maqtasi, he spoke in his book, Al-Dhail wa Sharhu. He quoted many letters which came, which were sent to him in Damascus. Now, he was in Syria. He was in Damascus. And he said that these letters were describing the fire which was seen by many eyewitnesses, and how it emerged and what it looked like. And Abu Shama's conclusion was, letters came to Damascus from Medina. May Allah bless the people of this land, saying that a fire had emerged there on the 5th day of Jumada al-Akhir of this year. The letters were written on the 5th of Rajab, and the fire was still raging. Okay, so this is serious fire. I mean, what possible fire can you think that people have in those days? We know that Saudi Arabia has got a lot of oil, right? But what possible fire could be raging like this? And it is when we look at the different reports, then we can start to see descriptions. There's a lot of letters that are here. And I want to just read you two of the letters. One is short, so you can start to see the descriptions. And it says, during the first week of Jumada al-Akhir, 654, there appeared to the east of Medina a great fire between which Medina was half day's journey. There burst forth from the earth a river of fire, which reached Mount Uhud. Then it stopped and went back. And this is the state of affairs now. We do not know what to do. When it started, the people went to the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, seeking forgiveness and repenting to their Lord. These are signs of the day of resurrection. Okay, so now you can start to see. Now, think about it. It said, and these are people who are not into science, they described it as a river of fire. What does that sound like? That sounds like volcanic lava. Okay, and we can understand that now because, you know, we have studied the effects of lava in the world and the things that have come about. Now, another interesting report, and this one comes about Abu Shama again, you know, is reporting. And, you know, I want to add something onto this too, because this is interesting. Remember now, Baghdad was at that time the capital of the Muslim world. And it was one of the greatest cities in the world, but it had gone corrupted. The Khalifa was only symbolic leader of the Muslims. And there were very few strong believers at the time ready, prepared to defend Islam. There was division into states. The rich were stealing from the poor. And in this report, and I want to read the top to show you what changes Muslims have gone through, right? And it said, this letter was from Banu Fashani, and it says in Jumada Akhira, some of the people from Iraq came to us. So these people now had come to Medina, and they told us that there had been a great flood in Baghdad. Okay, this is 1256. The water had reached the tops of the walls of Baghdad, and a large part of the city was flooded. The water entered the middle of the city, Dar al-Khilafah, and the palace of the Wazir, and 380 houses were flooded. The treasury of the Khalifa was also flooded, and a large part of his armory had been destroyed. The people were very close to being destroyed. Boats had started to enter the middle of the city, passing through the streets of Baghdad. Now, this is 2 years before the Mongols came and then circled it and took it. So you could see that based upon the weakness of the Muslims, like a type of punishment, this water is a literal flood, you know, and then the Mongols came. But the important part of this report is the second part. And he says, as for us, a major event has occurred among us. On the night of Wednesday, the 3rd of Jumada al-Akhirah, and for 2 days beforehand, the people started to hear a sound like the sound of thunder. These are simple people living in Medina. The sound of thunder which frightened all of the people. They awoke from their sleep and started to pray to Allah for forgiveness. They hastened to the mosque and they prayed there. And it kept shaking with them hour after hour until the morning. That continued all day on Wednesday and on Thursday night and Friday. 3 days. This quaking was going on. On Friday, the earth started to shake so violently that the minarets of the mosque were shaking and the roof of the mosque was heard creaking loudly. The people were scared because of their sins. Okay, that's a natural thing because we're all doing something wrong, right? They were scared because of their sins. The earthquake subsided on Friday morning before noon. Okay, then he continues. He said, then there appeared in the Harra, there's two Harras in Medina. There's the eastern and the western. Okay, I actually live with my family in the western side. Okay, but this, the way it appears in the description, would be the eastern side. And Harra means it's volcanic lava that got solid. And so it's really sharp. It's like black, and it's really sharp, and horses and camels cannot go over this lava. And that is the reason why you remember in the Battle of the Trench that they did not have to defend the eastern and western side of Medina, because Harra. Because nobody can go through there. Okay? So, getting back to the tradition, now it said, then there appeared in the Harra behind Qurayza, that's Banu Qurayza, the Jewish settlement, on the road of Al-Sawaqiyah, a huge fire which burst forth from the earth and flowed from morning until noon. The people were utterly terrified of it. Then there appeared smoke which billowed up into the sky until it looked like white clouds, and it remained there until just before sunset on Friday. Then there appeared fire with tongues reaching up to the sky, red and huge like fortresses. The people fled to the mosque of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, and to his tomb, where they gathered around the tomb, bared their heads, and confessed their sins. So this is serious. Everybody's just like, it's over. They're confessing this. They beseeched Allah and sought help by virtue of his Prophet ﷺ. The people came to the mosque from every corner of the city, and the women and children came out of their houses. So everybody in Medina is going to the mosque. Because they figured if there's any place that might be saved, that would be where the body of the Prophet ﷺ is, and where that sacred area. If there's any place that's going to be saved. They all gathered and prayed sincerely to Allah. The redness of the fire covered the entire sky, as if the people were in the light of the moon. And the sky remained the color of a blood clot. The people were certain that they would be destroyed and punished. They spent the whole night praying, reading Quran, bowing, prostrating, praying to Allah, repenting their sins, and seeking Allah's forgiveness. The fire stayed where it was then, and it started to decrease in intensity and size. So it's now coming up, and as it came close in the area of the mosque, then it settled down. Okay? So now you can see what it is. It's a volcano. And Medina is a volcano area. It's very high up and has active volcanoes. So getting back to the reports, it said this happened in the year 654 AH, as we have mentioned. That's Ibn Kathir. The chief Qadi, Sadr al-Din Ali ibn Abul Qasim al-Tamimi al-Hanafi, the judge of Damascus, told me, talking to Ibn Kathir, whilst we were discussing this hadith and this fire which happened in this year, I heard, this is what the chief Qadi said, I heard a Bedouin telling my father in Busra about those nights when they saw the necks of their camels in the light of the fire which had appeared in the land of Hijaz. There's the hadith. So the chief Qadi then shows his own family member was there. And the Bedouins, they could see the necks of their camel from this fire. So this is like hundreds of miles away, right? And some descriptions, they said it's like that you got lamps on all around you, but it is way down in Medina and they're up in Syria. So this is one of the clear signs, the fire of Hijaz. The hadith is there very clear. And this is codified evidence for those who like to have physical evidence in this. It's interesting to see how Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, and the scholars actually dealt with this. So this is the fire of Hijaz. Now, there are signs that occurred and are ongoing. So it happens, but yet either it continues or something, it'll stop and then start again. So these are other types of signs. And when we look at this, one of the main areas that the scholars have codified is the area of wars and conquest. And the Prophet ﷺ said in an authentic hadith, "Inna Allah zawali al-ard." Allah showed me the earth, and I saw the east and the west. And the dominion of my ummah will reach as far as all that I was shown. I have been given two treasures, the red and the white. And so this hadith and others similar to it, the Prophet ﷺ is saying that Allah folded up the earth for me, because his visions that he actually had, where he was shown even the expanse of the earth. And it said Allah folded up the earth to me, and he showed me the east and he showed me the west. Right? And he said that the mulk or the dominion of the ummah would reach as far as you can see. Now, many people look at this and they think, okay, so this is, these people are warmongers. Because right from the beginning, they're talking about wars and conquests. But when you look at the early movement of Islam, and this map, the green shows you, within the first 100 years plus, you will see where the Muslims moved. And basically speaking, and it's important to go back to the life of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, because he was not really a warrior in the sense of Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great. Actually, when you look at his life, he never actually fought in the battles. He was not on the front lines fighting or anything like that. When he was young, he participated in this war that was happening in Mecca. But mainly he would be making dua, he would be leading the troops. He was not into war. And if you look at the numbers that actually died in the battles, today they're insignificant. Because they would say like 80 people died. That is a massacre if 80 people died. Sometimes 80 people die with one strike of a bomb today. Okay, so the battles did not have large numbers. The Prophet ﷺ himself was not personally involved in the actual fighting. So Muslims were not into war. That was not the whole issue. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, his relationship with the other nations was that before his death, he sent out letters to the kings. He sent letters to the kings in Arabia, and then he sent letters to Najashi in Ethiopia, to the king of Egypt. He sent to the Caesar of Rome, Byzantine Romans. He sent to the Kisra, the Shah, you could say, of Persia. So the major empires of the world, he sent letters inviting them to Islam. He was not inviting them to war or threatening them. He was inviting them to accept Islam so that they would be blessed and their people would be blessed. And the messengers were basically going out like this, but the response of the empires, especially the Romans and the Persians, it was hostility. And the Romans, when Heraclius got this letter, and some Arabs, Abu Sufyan and people, were there in the area of Constantinople because they're doing business. And he actually asked them, tell me about this man. Do his numbers increase or decrease? And they said they're increasing. Slowly, but they're increasing. And then Heraclius asked, do his followers leave him? Or do they stay? Or how does it go? And he said, they stay. And when he listened to the description of the Prophet ﷺ, Heraclius knew. And he felt within himself, this is a dangerous man. Because this man is doing prophetic type of work. This is not just a military leader. And so the Romans threatened to attack the Muslims. And the Muslims went out, what is now known as Tabuk. They went to meet them in Tabuk, which would be northern Saudi Arabia and the area of Jordan. Allah put fear in the hearts of the Romans. They never came. But the point is, they threatened to attack Hijaz with 100,000 warriors. And that's 5 times more than every man, woman, and child in Medina. So think about a threat that they had. On the other side, the Roman or the Persian emperor, when he got the letter from the Muslims, he took the letter and he tore it up. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, Mazaqallahu mulka. May Allah tear up his empire. And these were the Sassanid Persians. They were arrogant. They had defeated the Romans even. So they were arrogant people. And so hostility began. So therefore the Muslims were being attacked from the north, attacked from the east. In terms of Ethiopia, they had a positive relationship because of Najashi, but it was animosity. And so they responded to the attacks. And the rules of engagement, and this is important because right away when people mention war, right, you think of terrorists, right? You think of suicide bombers. You will think of the curved sword. But the Prophet ﷺ, when he instructed his soldiers in war, he would tell them, do not kill any child, any woman, or any elder or sick person. And then he said, do not practice treachery or mutilation. Do not mutilate people. 3, do not uproot or burn palms or cut down fruitful trees. Okay, so that no destruction. 4, do not slaughter a sheep or a cow or a camel except for food. Okay, these are rules of engagement. 5, if one fights his brother, and this can be a personal thing too, he must avoid striking the face, for Allah created him in the image of Adam. This is in Bukhari and Muslim. 6, do not kill the monks in monasteries. Do not kill those sitting in places of worship. 7, do not destroy the villages and towns. Do not spoil the cultivated fields and gardens. And do not slaughter the cattle. 8, do not wish for an encounter with the enemy. Pray to Allah to grant you security. But when you are forced to encounter them, exercise patience. Hold the line. So so you don't ask to go into a fight. Right? But if it happens, hold the line. And 9, no one may punish with fire except the Lord of fire. And 10, accustom yourselves to do good if people do good, and to not do wrong even if they commit evil. Okay? So these are the rules of engagement. So the Muslims were actually told, and some traditions are saying that if the enemy seeks peace, if they ask for peace, give it to them. So the idea of the war was not war for conquest's sake. The idea of the war was to raise and defend kalimatullah, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we don't say it's all defensive wars in the sense of, just defense. But sometimes when hostility is coming and it's about to happen, Muslims will take the offensive because they know the hostility is coming. But the intention is al-amru bil ma'ruf wa nahi anil munkar. This is the intention. And so with this in mind, and we look at some of these conquests, Nafi' ibn Utbah narrated that the Prophet ﷺ said, you will fight in the Arabian Peninsula. Then Allah will enable you to conquer. Then Persia, and Allah will enable you to conquer it. Then you will fight Rome, and Allah will enable you to conquer it. Then you will fight the Dajjal. This is the Antichrist. And Allah will enable you to defeat him. So this is a very important tradition of the Prophet ﷺ. And again, this is a person who is not into war himself, but his visions are coming to him. And so when the visions came, he would then give it the way that it was coming to him from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's interesting that it's talking about the Persians, the Romans, and then the Dajjal. This is how serious the Antichrist is. Okay, and this, of course, is one of these, fitnas, these terrible tests that are actually on the way. And in terms of this, Bukhari narrated that Adi ibn Hatim, and Adi is one of the famous companions. He said, a man came to him and complained about poverty. Then another man came to him and complained to him about banditry on the highways. Okay, so they came to Adi. And he said, O Adi, have you seen the city of Al-Hira? And I said, I have not seen it, but I have heard of it. Okay, so this is, all right, so this, let me read, this is the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, so while I was with the Prophet, a man came to the Prophet. Okay, complained about poverty. Then another man came and complained about banditry on the highway. So now the Prophet is turning to Adi. And he said, O Adi, have you seen the city of Al-Hira? I said, I have not seen it, but I have heard of it. He said, if you live a long life, you will see a woman traveling in a litter, this Hawdaj, on a camel's back, coming from Al-Hira, this is like Iraq area, to perform tawaf around the Kaaba, fearing nobody except Allah. I wondered to myself, what about the bandits of Tay? Because there are a lot of bandits on the road between Iraq and Syria and coming into... he said, so he thought to himself, what about the bandits of Tay who are spreading mischief throughout the land? The Prophet ﷺ said, and if you live a long life, you will acquire the treasure of Kisra. This is the Shah of Persia. I said, Kisra, the son of Hormuz? He said, yes, Kisra, the son of Hormuz. And if you live a long life, you will see a man bringing out a handful of gold or silver, looking for someone to accept it from him, but he will not find anyone to accept it from him. Then one of you will meet Allah on the day, and when he meets him, there will be no interpreter between him and Allah. He will say, did I not send you a messenger who conveyed the message? He will say, indeed. He will say, did I not give you wealth and bestow my bounty upon you? He will say, indeed. Then he will look to his right and see nothing but hell. And he will look to his left and see nothing but hell. And Adi, radiallahu anh, he said that I heard the Messenger of Allah sallallahu say, ittaqun na walau bi shiqqi tamra. It's a very important thing. He said, save yourself from the fire, even if it is with a half of a date in charity. Save yourself from the fire. And it continues, and whoever does not have a half a date, then let him say a good word. Okay. Now, Adi continues. Adi said, and this now is the fulfilling of this hadith. He said, I saw a woman traveling in a litter on a camel's back, coming from Al-Hira, performing tawaf around the Kaaba, fearing nobody except Allah. And I was among those who acquired the treasures of Kisra. And if you live a long life, you will see what the Prophet ﷺ spoke of a man coming out with the handful. So he said, I didn't see the last part. But the first two, I saw them. Okay, so this is another tradition which is part of it came and some of it is about to come. But the dominion or the mulk of the spread of Islam in terms of responding to the Romans, responding to the Persians, led them to find that the Romans were corrupted, the Persians were corrupted, and so they literally took over their empires to a great extent. And here you see, this is the dominion or the empire of the Umayyad dynasty. So this is within 100 years, you can see how far this has reached. Nobody has moved like this and actually maintained. And those areas, that are there except for Spain, these areas are actually heartlands of Islam. So in many cases, you'll see the Mongols or Alexander the Great. They will come into an area, they will kill, conquer. And then when they're finished, they're driven away and the people go back to their life. This is different because this is not a physical conquest. This is the spreading of Islam. And the military aspect is to deal with the oppression coming from the Persians and the Romans and people like this. So you can see now how far in that reaches. And Thawban narrates that the Prophet ﷺ said, "The hour will not come until you fight the Turks, who have small eyes, red faces, and flat noses. And if their faces are flattened shields, the hour will not come until you fight a people whose shoes are made of hair." See if you can find the brother Tahmid. Yeah, see if you can find him. See if he may be there. Yeah, mic may be off. It's a little technical difficulty. I don't know whether you're hearing me or not. That's the mic? Yeah, you have to wait till he comes, because it's a little bit technical. Okay. But while we're waiting, what? Okay, while we're waiting for him to come anyway, are there any questions anybody has so far? Do you see a picture there?
Yeah, I see a picture.
Okay, so maybe,
You're back online.
yeah, so we should be back online, hopefully.
Yeah, you're back online.
But, till he comes, are there any general questions anybody has, so far, about these traditions? The pieces,
everything's fine on the stream.
it broke. The whole thing fell down.
Oh, it fell down.
Yeah, it fell down. It completely fell down.
Is that the right spot?
Just make sure that it's put in the right place.
Yeah, everything's okay.
Oh, you don't need that?
Okay.
So you don't need that?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so those who may have questions, can put it in the chat or whatever it is. But again, this is interesting now because in this tradition, the Prophet ﷺ is talking about fighting. They use the word Turk, but actually the Turk and the Mongols are actually related. They're coming from the area, Altai Mountains and Siberia and Mongolia. All of these areas, they're like cousins within the same, Turkish-Mongolian group. Okay, and the Turks that you know today have actually mixed with some with Persian and some with European, and so they are mixed. But when you go to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, then you'll start to see the original Turkish Mongolian, look. And then, of course, in Mongolia, you'll get more of the original Asli look. So the word Turk is being used. Some people think they think about, they're watching Ertugrul Bey and whatnot. This is nice brown hair with a curl in it, whatever. Like they're mixed with European blood, right? They're not the original Turks that were coming out of that area. Although you'll see, even in these movies, you'll still see some of the real Asli Turk. Look at the description. And in Arabia, they didn't have much contact with Turks. So when they went up into Syria and trading in those areas, they may have come across some of the people because the Silk Road from China going across there. So those who went north. But those deep south of Arabia would not have come across many people. However, they knew about them, and he describes them. So he describes them as having small eyes, red faces, and flat noses. Right? And their faces are like flattened shields. Right? And the hour will not come until you fight a people whose shoes are of hair. Because they line their boots. They're living in the cold tundra. So therefore, you use, like we use, wool, lamb's wool and everything. You line your shoes and cover it with hair and wool. In Arabian Peninsula, there's no way you're going to do that. Okay, so, but for them, this is a prediction of something which happened, and it is ongoing, because it will continue on as we go. And of course, alhamdulillah, from the time of the Abbasid period, at the Battle of Talas, it's called, the Turkish people embraced Islam and then became part of the Abbasid dynasty, and then we have the famous Seljuks, and then the Ottomans, and the great contributions they have made. Okay? Now, another interesting hadith of Tawban, he narrated, and he said, 2 groups of my ummah will be saved by Allah from the fire. The group which conquers India, and the group which will be with Isa alayhi salam. Isa, Jesus the son of Mary. Okay, this is in the Musnad of Imam Ahmed. So these are 2 famous groups. So one of them, many of the scholars believe that this would be Sayyidina Muhammad bin Qasim, rahimahullah. Muhammad bin Qasim was a great leader during the Umayyad period. And he conquered, he took the area right up until the Sindh. It's the Sindh area of Pakistan, Baluchistan. Okay? And so many people believe that was the first real entrance in what they would call Hind, meaning Indo-Pakistani subcontinent. Area. It was Muhammad bin Qasim. Allah knows best whether it is him or not. It's interesting, though, that Muhammad bin Qasim, when I was reading about him, he's actually buried in a place called Makran. And Makran is in the area of Baluchistan and the Sindh. Makranis are actually African Pakistanis. Their look, their hair, and they're Africans, but they're Pakistanis. And they're called Makranis, or Sidis. And they live in the area of the Sindh, there in Baluchistan, in that area. And the grave of Muhammad bin Qasim is there in Makran. That's where he's buried, because that is the area of the Sindh, that he actually conquered, and he was buried there in the area of the Sindh. A question? You have a question? Yeah. It's interesting, because I was in Pakistan myself. I was in Karachi, and we were in the hotel, and this person came in, Afro guy with he had an Afro haircut, and look, and he was talking Urdu, right? So I said to the brother, "What is this, man?" They said, "Makrani." He's a Makrani. This is Karachi, right? And I was shocked. And I went to a Pakistani scholar, and I said, "Who do you think this is?" And he said, "It's one of 3 things. It could be people who were left, East Africans who came during the time of the Abbasids, when the salt marshes in the Iraq were covered. So they brought in slaves from East Africa. Now, normally, slavery was not like this. In the Muslim world, it was more domestic and then mercenary soldiers. But these people were brought in to clear the salt marsh. And it was terrible. It was ball and chain slavery. And they revolted. And somebody from amongst the Ahlul Bayt, who claimed that he was the Mahdi, he became the leader of their movement, right? So this is called the Revolt of the Zenj. You can look it up. Revolt of the Zenj. And this happened in Iraq. And so the descendants of these African people, he said it could be them, or it could be descendants of the Omanis. Because the Omanis from Oman in Arabia, they had controlled the Sind for a period of time. It was part of the Sultanate of Oman. So it could, and they were based in Oman and also in Zanzibar, which is in East Africa. And they were mixed with African blood, as well. Or, he said, the third is the original man, the original people of Pakistan. Because if human beings came out of Africa, right, then that means all nations, actually the base of all nations, actually came out of that, and over thousands of years, whatever, we changed. But he said it could even be that. Allah knows best. So now, the next point of these ongoing signs is the emergence of liar prophets. And Abu Huraira radiallahu anh narrated that the Prophet ﷺ said, there will be 30 liar prophets, Dajjalin, among my ummah, each of whom will claim he is a prophet, but I am the seal of the prophets. There will be no prophet after me. Okay? And we have in the past studied the liar prophets with some details. This is an ongoing sign. And we actually identified about 21 of the liar prophets. In another hadith, which is reported in the Silsila, a hadith Sahiha, the Prophet ﷺ said 27 Dajjals, meaning liar prophets, including 4 women, that there will be 4 women liar prophets. One we know for sure, Sajah, in the time of Musaylima. Right, so that's in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, just after him and Abu Bakr, was Sajah bin Harith. But in one hadith it said there will be 3 others as well, who are claiming prophethood. Now, we identified about 21 of them, and this is a study in itself, which we don't have time to go into now. But just some of the names: Musaylima, Al-Aswad al-Ansi, there's Sajah bint Harith, a woman, Tulayha, these were in the Arabian Peninsula, Al-Mukhtar al-Thaqafi, that's another one in the Umayyad time, and Baha'u'llah. Now you might know Baha'u'llah of the Baha'is, because the Baha'i religion, he actually claimed prophethood. He had his own book and whatnot, so he would be considered to be amongst the liar prophets. Another one familiar, Mirza Ghulam Ahmed, of India and of Pakistan. That is the Ahmadiyya movement, or the Qadiani movement. He claimed prophethood very clearly. He claimed he was prophet, he claimed he was Jesus, he claimed he was a Mahdi. Then he said he was the greatest prophet of all, the prophets. Then there is Mahmud Muhammad Taha. He's a Sudani. He was in the Sudan. And he claimed to be a prophet as well. That's 1958. And then there was Elijah Muhammad. That's the Nation of Islam in America, right? Since 1930 to the 60s. And they're still there. Minister Farrakhan is still there, holding his group. And then there was a man that went right up until the 90s. His name was Rashad Khalifa. He was an Egyptian, and he was a great computer scientist. And he was into the computers when people were not into computers. So right in the beginning times, he was like a high-level engineer. And he found something that he believed that the number 19, because they were working with, of course, numbers and frequencies and whatnot, and he found that the number 19 was repeating itself over and over again. His theory was actually disproven, but to a certain extent, there's some places where it does come in. So then he said, I am the last prophet. Shaitan went to his head. And he said, I'm the last prophet. And my miracle, Musa alayhi salam had the water. Isa alayhi salam was born without a father. All the prophets said, he said, my miracle is the computer. Right? And that I have found number 19. Like the 19 angels guarding hellfire. So the number 19, I have found this. And then I can remember being in the Jami Mosque here in Toronto and receiving his flyer saying that he's the greatest prophet of all the prophets, whatnot. And he's a little Egyptian guy, a Fendi guy with a suit, an engineer. Like you'd think at least he'd have a big hat or a beard, whatnot. But he was an engineer. But Shaitan can go to anybody's head, and eventually, he died mysteriously, and he's probably the last that we have known of. But we only identified about 21. And Allah knows best. This more than likely is ongoing. Because with collective insanity that happens to groups that are under a lot of pressure, then you get people who have these tendencies, where they feel it's like a mental illness. That can happen. It's like they feel greatness inside themselves. So prophethood can actually come. So another one of the signs of the last days is Al-Khawarij. And this is the Kharijites, or the ones who broke away from the Muslim Ummah in the early days of Islam. Now, what is important we want to know about this is the fact that not only did it happen, but it is ongoing. Because the Khawarij movement that we learned about happened from the time of Uthman, when Uthman radiallahu anh, the great Khalifa, was assassinated, and then Ali took over, radiallahu anh, and Muawiyah, who was in the family of Uthman, he disagreed, and the Umayyads, Uthman's family, who were in Syria, they disagreed, and a great fitna happened. And we've actually studied the fitna somewhat, in these classes. This was a terrible trial, a struggle that went on in between the Sahaba at the time. And there was one group, and the followers of Ali, who it was like group insanity. They could not take Muslim fighting Muslim, or they couldn't deal with, and they went crazy, and they went against everybody. And the leader of their group, his name was Dhul Khawaisara at-Tamimi. Now, Banu Tamim is a very big tribe that you see in Arabia and Oman and many places. But the root of this sickness, you could say Khawarij mentality, is he preferred his opinion over the Prophet's opinion. And then he resorted to violence. And these Khawarij did some terrible things. And so part of the nature of Khawarijism, and this is where the ongoing part of this comes in. Number one is that, and this was strange about the Khawarij in the time of Ali. Even though they were against the Khalifa, they tried to assassinate Ali, Muawiyah, and Amr ibn al-As, and they were in a state of insanity. They were highly religious people. And when the companions went close to them, it was like you could hear like buzzing of bees from reading the Quran. And their heads were calloused from making prostration. Their eyes were red from tahajjud. Could you imagine this? But at the same time, they're considered to be the dogs of Jahannam, the dogs of hell. That's how they're described in Hadith. Okay? What else about them? Fanatical observances of Islamic rituals. So they will go to extremes in Islamic rituals. And I saw this tendency when I was in Medina. And especially among students of knowledge from all the different Islamic movements, you'll see this tendency that is there. And I can remember there were students studying the hadiths, and they wanted to put all the hadith into practice immediately. So we're in Medina in the Prophet's Mosque, and one of the hadith was saying that the Prophet ﷺ on occasion prayed in his shoes. And he told his companions, pray in your shoes. So it's okay. And if you look at the early mosque of the Prophet, there's no rug on the mosque. is actually, ground. And so he said, pray in your shoes. And in one tradition, he actually cleaned, it was something not clean on his shoe, and Jibreel alayhi salam informed him, and he cleaned it off. Okay? So these brothers said, pray in your shoes. So they went to the Prophet's mosque, and they went to the first line in the Prophet's mosque, and they walked across everybody's prayer mat with their shoes on. Now, in this group there were brothers from Afghanistan. And you do not walk on somebody from Afghanistan with your shoes on their rug. And so I was outside the mosque, and they took them and they threw them outside the mosque. And the brother goes on the ground and he says, Fi sabilillah, in the name of Allah. I said, look, brother, what's your problem, man? And then I went to some of the Afghan brothers later. I asked, why you think they would react so heavily to these brothers? Because, there is a hadith saying pray in your shoes. And they said, no, because in our country, if you walk outside, then for sure there's something filthy on your shoe. And so therefore, you're going to take off your shoes when you come inside of a masjid. So this was an insult. But that's fanatical observances of Islam. Like you take the literal aspects of Islam, you don't think about the context. You don't think about the people, you just practice what you think is right. The Khawarij also have a distorted view of the world. So they have a boxed-in mentality. They have a disregard for human life, a total disregard. And they disrespect the Sahaba. So in other words, in the time of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anh, they even killed some of the Sahaba. Their children, whatever, they had no respect because they thought they were right. Everybody else is going to hellfire. And they have an extreme view on sin and takfir. Takfir it's a takfir bil ma'asi. That is that they believe that if you commit sins, even some minor sins, then you are kafir. You're not a Muslim when you're committing sins. Okay, so that's part of their extremism. And they have harshness with non-Muslims and harshness with anybody who opposes them. So this mentality of the Khawarij, it still exists up until today. And it's something that we experienced with the movements of ISIS and Daesh and some extreme movements, things that are going on, Boko Haram in Nigeria, and there are things, extremism. Of course, these movements are very complicated. But you can see no regard for human life, extremism, no regard for the scholars. This is ongoing. See, it's a mentality that is ongoing amongst the science. Now, in terms of their history, Ali defeated the Khawarij in Nahrawan. But another group appeared. The Khawarij, they sent out assassins to kill Ali, Muawiyah, and Amr ibn al-As, radiallahu anh. And Ali, the only one that succeeded was Abdurrahman ibn Muljam. He succeeded in killing Ali, radiallahu anh. He stabbed him. Okay? So this is the mentality of the Khawarij, man. Could you imagine? You think you're doing right killing Ali ibn Abi Talib? That's insanity. And the Khawarijite, they rebelled against Al-Hassan. This is the son of Ali who had taken over after him. Fighting continued on during the Umayyad period and the Abbasid, period. And there's remnants of them in Oman. The official religion, the Ibadi way of life in Oman, the Omanis, right, in Arabia, they are not Sunni and not Shia. They are Ibadi. And you'd be surprised if someone prays with a hand on the side. It is actually an Ibadi, and they are remnants of the Khawarij. They have their own hadith books. They have their own mentality. But now, because the Omanis spread into East Africa, and they met the teachings of Imam al-Shafi in East Africa, many of the Omanis became Shafis. And so they recently, in the past few decades, have been returning to Oman. And so now you will find a lot of Shafis in Oman, and the official doctrine of the Ibadis have changed, where they do not consider the Sunnis, Shia, they do not consider them to be, non-Muslims and whatever. No, they say it's kufr and ni'mah. They say, you denied the blessings, right? But they don't say you're total kafir. It's just kufr and ni'mah, right? And their leader, their Sheikh Khalili, he comes to some international conferences. And but the mentality of the Khawarij, it exists. And it is something which was predicted, and it is something which, will be there as we move toward the day of resurrection. And so, in this light, again, we need solutions. Mu'adh ibn Jabal reported that the Prophet ﷺ said, the devil is like a wolf among humans, as a wolf is among sheep. It snatches the stray sheep. So beware of the paths which branch off, and adhere to the jama'ah and the masses and the masjid. Right? Stick to the jama'ah. Means as much as you possibly can find of a united body, and the masses of the Muslims, which today is the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and the masjid. As long as you can stick into the masjid and stay into this. And there is one hadith narrated by Hudayfa, radiallahu anhu, where the Prophet ﷺ was saying, Hudayfa asked the Prophet ﷺ that, what if you don't find any jamaat? Okay? And what if there's no imam and no jamaat? Then the Prophet ﷺ said, bite on to a tree until death finds you like this. In other words, what he said, hang on to the roots of your religion until Allah takes your life. So if there's no jamaat, if there's no imam, no masjid, hang on to your faith anyway. Okay? And this is a very important prophetic reminder. And these are very important signs that we need to understand, because what is happening today to a great extent in many parts of the world, it has happened before. And the Muslim world has gone through traumatic changes, has gone through a lot of cycles. And we need to be aware, of the signs that are happening. And inshallah, in the next class, we will be looking at minor signs that have not yet occurred. So now there's a set of minor signs, they haven't happened yet. Okay, so we want to know what these signs are. And as we move along, before we go into the major signs. Okay? So I want to open up the floor for any questions that anybody may have concerning the signs.
Questions. First
Yeah.
of all, under what circumstances can we pray with our shoes on?
Praying with your shoes or not with your shoes has nothing to do with your prayers. In other words, technically speaking, you can pray with your shoes as long as you have wudu. When you put the shoes on, you can pray, with your shoes all the time. But, it's easier, obviously, to pray without your shoes in the sitting positions, as well. And of course, if you're in a masjid, we respect the sanctity of the masjid, and we take it off. But I found some practical times. here in Canada, I went to the Northwest Territories, or sometimes you're in a mall. It's winter time, and you got to make asa, man.
Yeah.
So you just keep your shoes on, your boots, put down your rug, whatever, and you pray, man. So it would be foolish to take off your shoes in the snow, right?
Okay.
Just put your rug down and pray in the snow. I found it in Arabia. We were traveling between Medina and Riyadh. And this is back in the 70s. So this is when the days when and we came into a masjid. It had no rugs. And it was like, pebbles, Bedouins. And it was the Salatul Dhuhr. And if you put your feet on that ground, so we prayed in our sandals, man. We prayed in our shoes. That's the only thing is, you just have to make sure there's no najasa, something unclean on your shoe. As long as your shoes are clean, then it is permissible to pray. Sometimes, out of habit and traditions, we think that, certain things are, permissible or necessary. I remember in the Jami Mosque that people the Qurans would be on a shelf, and the people would take their shoes and they walk across, holding their shoes underneath the Quran. And they walked across the mosque because they wouldn't want the shoes to go above the Quran. Which is a good-hearted person, right? But it has nothing to do, with the Quran, but it's just taken out of context. Second question.
Okay, this might be a tough one, but is it fair for us to say that Shias, Ismailis, Ahmadiyas are not Muslims?
Yeah. The takfir is a really serious thing. Saying somebody's not a Muslim is really serious. And so none of us are muftis to be making the rulings. But muftis have made rulings. And there are some people who use the name of Islam, but they actually do not practice the kalima. They might not believe, like the Nation of Islam, for instance, right? They believe Allah was a man who came to Chicago. That was Allah. So even though he said he was a Muslim, how can you say that he's a Muslim? And they believe that Muhammad was the last prophet. And the Ahmadiyya Qadiani movement, they believed that Ghulam Muhammad was the last prophet. They didn't conceal it. It's very clear. So the decision was made by, the World Muslim League of ulama that, this is outside of Islam. Anybody following a false prophet is outside of Islam. Okay? And even amongst the Shia, right, the Itna Ashari Shia, the 12ers, they are considered to be within the mainstream of Islam. And they make Hajj and everything. Even the hardcore, Najdi, Saudi scholars allow them to come in because they're Muslims. As long as they don't believe in some of the extremes. But amongst the Shia, in the Shia world, there are extremists. There were Hashashin, there were Duruz, the Duruz of Syria, who believed that their leader, Al-Hakim bi Amrillah, was God, and his Darzi was like a prophet. In the Ismaili groups, also the Fatimids of Egypt and people like this, they actually had beliefs that took them outside of Islam. So when Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, took power in Egypt, before he fought the Crusaders, he actually made the Sunnah to be the way of Egypt, because the Fatimids were the ones, the Shia Fatimids, they built Cairo, and they were controlling Azhar University. Right? So the first thing Salah ad-Din did was to bring in the Shafi'i school and make it clear we're following Sunnah. Then he united the Muslim world. So we don't like to be calling people names. We want people to be included. However, there are people who are using the word Muslim, using the word Allah, and they're not practicing Islam. So there's nothing wrong with, believing that. We pray for everybody, and we hope that people can understand, the Sunnah and the way to follow Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. But what can you do? I mean, I lived in America. I, experienced people, in the Nation of Islam. And I argued with them. They said, you people believe in a spook God. Our God is real. You can touch him. And he's a real person. You believe in a spook in the sky. That's how we were arguing, right? And then they said they don't believe in the Day of Judgment. They said, if you're happy now, you're in paradise. If you're sad, you're in hell. So what is this Islam? This is not Islam. Alhamdulillah, their leaders died, and Warith ad-Din, the son of Elijah, took them into the Sunnah. So the overwhelming majority of them are following, the Sunnah now, and may Allah guide the rest, back to the Sunnah. Now, are there any questions in the chat room? Tahmid? Any questions coming in the chat? Check and see. Any other questions? Anybody else?
Looking at the Lara Prophet, are we just looking among the Muslims, or do we go outside of that?
Yeah, we're mainly talking about the Muslims. Because in the Hadith, the Prophet said all of them claim that he is a prophet. He's the prophet, meaning the last prophet, right? But I am the seal. So there wouldn't be. If it was outside of that, there might be thousands of them. Might be thousands. Yeah, you go down, Young Street or whatever. These little drug addicts. You'll find people, claiming prophethood. You'll find all kinds of things. But no, this is Muslims.
A lot of people are asking if you mean the people of Turkey.
No, so what we're talking about is the I don't want to use the word race, but the Turkish people, are a group of people who come from the Siberia, Mongolia, the Altai Mountains, which is now Kazakhstan. And so they are broken into different groups. Okay, so this is the original Atrak. So when they were talking about the Turks and the Hadith, Turkey was not established. Turkey is only a recent phenomenon in the past 100 years or so. And then the Ottomans were, only, a few hundred years. This is in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So they were talking about the Turk people, Mongolian Turkish people, because they're cousins. And Genghis Khan had amongst his troops, he had Turkish warriors. He believed they were some of his best warriors. But the majority of the Turks, his cousins, they left and they went west. And they formed the Seljuks and then the Ottomans. Right? And they fought against the Mongols. But in his time, you could say that they were very similar and they're more like Mongols. So this is not Turkey today. This would not be considered, this today. And Allah knows best. Other questions?
No, there's no other questions.
So inshallah, we will continue on, and next week we will be looking at the minor signs that have not yet occurred. And this is another very interesting, area because, and then even some that sort of, we're going to try to touch on some areas of the minor signs, and then start to go into the area of major signs. So we're going to start to go into the major signs, and Allah knows best. So we ask Allah to, give us, guidance and give us light, and protect us from the evil of this world. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.